Hi, Be Health Empowered family. Welcome to another episode of Real Talk with Dr. Melissa Clarke. Thank you so much for joining us. We are welcoming a new platform tonight. That's YouTube. So thank you to all my YouTubers out there who are watching. And of course, my loyal Facebook and Instagram followers. Thank you so much for joining. We are going to be getting underway in just a few minutes, just as more people come into the room. It is going to be a fantastic hour. We're going to have two guests with us tonight who are both titans of their field. Emmanuel Bailey, representing the business community, Dr. Reed Tuckson, representing health and medicine. And we're going to have that same discussion that you're seeing playing out in the media around reopening. Are we ready to reopen? There's pressure on one side, on the business side. There's pressure on the health side. And we're going to see from both these experts where we should be and how fast we should be going. And you, YouTubers, Facebookers, everyone joining, come with your questions. You're going to have a chance to participate in the discussion. I really look forward to hearing from you. So again, we're just waiting for a few people to come in, get comfortable, grab your favorite healthy snack, your beverage of choice, and sit with us. Again, this is going to be a safe space to get any questions that you want to answered. So again, thank you so much for joining us. And just waiting just for a couple minutes as people stream in. We have a lot to talk about this week. Of course, we're going to start off with the weekly recap where we always do. And up until 5 hours ago, there was still news breaking that we are going to include and talk about. And we're going to do our second in the series of the weekly debunks. Actually, no, I think it's the third. So, we're tackling piece by piece of misinformation. Hi, Barbara Bailey. Thanks for coming. So we're going to be tackling that every week, as you know, in our weekly debunk series. Hi, Silver Logan Sharp. Thanks for joining. Seeing people streaming in now. So I think we're going to go ahead and get started because we have a lot to cover. So as always, I start off with the numbers. So we are now at 1.5 million cases confirmed. And as we always talk about, we know that is an undercount because we're not testing at the rate that is recommended, especially now that we're reopening the economy. Unfortunately, we do know that we're over 90,000 deaths in the United States. My heart goes out to all the families who have lost someone due to COVID-19. And actually, just on the news today, we've been talking about the fact that fewer people are going to the emergency department. Emergency medical technicians are reporting that the number of normal ambulance runs that they would be making during this time is 34% down. And what they're seeing, unfortunately, is that people are dying of home also due to non-COVID related illnesses like heart attacks and strokes because they're afraid to call 911. So as I always remind people, the hospital is still open. If you feel that you have an emergency, you should go, whether it's related to COVID or not. And then just to finish off the numbers is the good news that over 340,000 people have had COVID-19 and survived. So that is an important number to keep in mind as well. But some more numbers. We should know that even as we're talking about reopening, the virus is continuing to infect 20 to 30,000 people nationwide each day. And of course, we know that it's disproportionately affecting African Americans. So the death rate for African Americans is over 2.5 times that of whites. Another way to think of it is if Americans had died of COVID-19 all at the same rate, being that lower rate that whites are dying, 10,500 African Americans would still be alive today. It's a really staggering thing to consider. And if you go state by state, we know that not all states are reporting ethnicity data when it comes to COVID-19. So shout out to the states that are. But what we're seeing is, for example, in Arkansas, Illinois, Louisiana, New York, Oregon, and South Carolina, African Americans are dying at 3 times the rate of whites. In Michigan, 5 times. Missouri and Wisconsin and DC, 6 times. And Kansas, a staggering 7 times more likely to die of COVID 19, blacks versus whites. So I went into all that detail to sort of put into context, especially the discussion we're going to have tonight. But as far as a weekly recap goes, we know that states are reopening. Um, Only a couple have not reopened totally. Everyone else has reopened at least partially, and it's been up to the governor to make that decision. But only 2 states have met the guidelines for reopening as set by the White House on April 17th. So, special recognition to Muriel Bowser in Washington, D.C., the mayor, who has decided to keep the stay at home order in place until June 18th, precisely because of the number of deaths, the fact that the curve has not flattened, and the disproportionate number of deaths born in the African American community. And then for those states that have reopened, we've been seeing pictures, I know, all throughout the weekend because the weather was beautiful, of people packing into beaches and parks and on streets, not social distancing, not wearing masks. 17% fewer Americans are saying that they are practicing social distancing. But still, 58% of Americans are still either completely or partially isolating themselves. So people are still taking it seriously despite the pictures. The next thing I wanted to catch up on in the weekly recap is this Operation Warp Speed that the White House is doing to find a vaccine. Even up until today, we heard that Moderna, which is a company that's looking for a vaccine, has successfully tested it in 8 healthy volunteers and found that they all had immunity after a while, after the test was done. They're still enrolling people in that trial, but they feel positive and confident about that. For Operation Warp Speed, what they're trying to do is have 300 million vaccines ready by January. So what they're doing, the White House is investing money to ramp up production of vaccines, even if they're not ready. And you can argue that's not really a cost-effective way to do it, but nevertheless, the goal is to have these vaccines ready. And I would just say, experts have said that it takes, at best, 12 to 18 months to ramp up. The record for a vaccine to date is the mumps vaccine, which got ready in 4 years. So this is super aggressive. So we really have to make sure that the science is done right, that it's inclusive of all groups that the vaccine will be used on, and not disproportionately in one group that might not be affected as much as another group, but make sure that it's evenly tried in all populations, and that it's safe and effective before use. So the next thing I want to talk about in our weekly recap is the fact that people seem a little bit confused about masks. So cloth masks or procedure masks, this is a procedure mask, should cover the nose, mouth, and chin all the way. It should be snug but comfortable against the side of the face. It shouldn't be sagging like jeans. It should be secured with ties or ear loops. It should be made with multiple layers of material. So if you're making your own mask, it's good to put cotton on either side, and then maybe a paper towel or some other kind of vacuum bag filter material in between. It should allow you to breathe without restriction, and it should be able to withstand machine washing and drying. So now putting it on, You want to avoid touching the mask while using it, and you want to clean your hands with either disinfectant, hand sanitizer, or soap and water before you put it on and take it off. Avoid touching the mask a lot when you have it on. And when you take it off, you don't want to touch the front of the mask. You want to take it and put it immediately in a container and prevent the inner surface of the mask from coming in contact with the outer surface during storage. So if you have to fold it, you want to fold it like this without touching the outer surface of the mask. And then if you have a cloth mask, you want to clean it regularly. Wash it after every use, remove the filter. And if you can't wash it after every use, again, store it somewhere safe. So there shouldn't be any confusion about masks and how safe they are, but there is a great deal of confusion just this week. And so now I want to talk about the weekly debunk. Just this week, I've seen so many things on social media about concerns about wearing masks. And I think it comes from people who are saying, we should be free to do what we want to do and masks are dangerous. So I've seen masks linked to a collapsed lung, a car crash, 2 children passing out during exercising in school in Japan, just a lot of things that masks are being blamed for. So I want to set the record straight. This is our weekly debunk. So cloth masks and procedure masks, we just went over that they are different than N95 masks. So all masks are not equal. Cloth masks should be what everyone in the public is wearing. And both cloth masks and procedure masks don't fit tightly on the face. So therefore, you should not have any problems getting oxygen in your body or blowing out carbon dioxide. The other thing is accidents happen and health conditions happen anyway. So for example, a collapsed lung is called a spontaneous pneumothorax. It happens by itself about every 8 out of 100,000 people, and it's more common in tall, thin men specifically. So the fact that this gentleman was running and had a mask on and had a spontaneous collapsed lung probably has nothing to do with the mask. The other thing is N95 masks are not meant for exercising. They're the ones that have the tight seal and have to be fitted ideally and should only be worn by healthcare providers. And they're really not good to wear for more than an hour at a time. You should take a break after each hour of wearing it. And people with chronic lung problems or heart problems or other conditions that make it difficult to breathe shouldn't wear N95 masks also. So for all those reasons, it's important to distinguish between the different kinds of masks. Know that N95 masks are just for healthcare providers, are not meant to exercise in. And in general, face covering should not be used on children younger than 2, anybody who has problems breathing, or anybody who can't take the mask on and off by themselves. So just to reassure you that masks do work. In one study in the SARS epidemic, so not this one, but where it's SARS-CoV-2 is the virus for this in this epidemic or pandemic, and a previous one in Hong Kong with SARS, the first SARS virus, people who wore masks in public frequently were half as likely to become infected by the SARS coronavirus as those who didn't. And then also, it's estimated that if just 60% of the population wore a face covering that was 60% effective in blocking viral transmission, basically a well-fitting 2-layered cotton mask, the pandemic would be effectively stopped. So that's even more important as we look at on the pictures of people who have been, going around without a mask on the beaches and on the boardwalks that we saw this summer. It's even more important to let people who in your life who are close to you remind them that it's important to wear a mask as well as practice the other behaviors. So those include staying at home if you have no essential reason to go out, physically distancing 6 feet or more, washing your hands 20 seconds or more, and washing them frequently, not touching your face, and of course, wearing a mask. And then, as I always say too, a lot of transmission now is happening from people inside your household, people who are either going out and they're going to be going out more for work or now for business purposes or for recreation. And when they go out and come back in, especially if you are in a vulnerable population, people over 60 or people with an underlying health condition, you have to have a plan within your household. In one article I wrote, I called it the talk. Everybody has to sit down and agree to either physically distance in the house or wear masks in the house if one person is vulnerable and everybody else is coming in and out at will. Because every time you come back into the house, you have the risk of bringing the virus back in with you. Like I've said, like a Trojan horse. So have that plan within your household. So I am really happy tonight to welcome two fabulous guests for our discussion about reopening the economy. The first guest we have is Dr. Reed Tuckson. He's a physician, a healthcare executive, and he has extensive health leadership experience. He served as the District of Columbia Commissioner on Public Health at the height of the AIDS epidemic. He was president of the Charles R. Drew University of Medicine and Science in Los
Okay, I think we lost Dr. Clarke, but we have Dr. Tuckson with us, and we'll be getting back to Dr. Clarke in just one second. See if we can get her back in the studio. Everybody hang on. We are getting her back. We're waiting on Dr. Clarke to enter the studio again. Just a moment. We have Dr. Clarke coming back into the studio, and there she is.
All right, even the best laid plans. So I think we were about to introduce Dr. Reed Tuckson. And for those of you who didn't hear his introduction, I am going to repeat it because it is definitely worth knowing. He is a physician and healthcare executive with extensive health leadership experience. He was the DC Commissioner of Public Health at the height of the AIDS epidemic. He's been president of the Charles R. Drew University of Medicine and Science in Los Angeles and served as executive vice president and chief of medical affairs at United Healthcare. He is now managing tonight, Dr. Reed Tuckson. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. And then, as if Dr. Tuckson wasn't enough, we have another guest, Mr. Emmanuel Bailey. He is the president and chief executive officer of DC09 LLC, which has successfully completed a 10-year contract with DC and has held leadership positions at families such as the Greater Washington Boys and Girls Club and the Kevin Durant Charity Foundation, founded by NBA superstar Kevin Durant. And he also currently serves on the board of Greater Washington Urban League. So thank you so much for joining us, Emmanuel. And we are going to have a wonderful exchange tonight. The focus is going to be about reopening the economy. But first, I want to start with Dr. Tuckson. I ran down the grim statistics around how COVID-19 is disproportionately affecting the African American community. Can you tell us an initiative that you're involved with? Because it seems like so much negative news, and I really would love for you to talk about the Black Coalition Against COVID-19, because I think it really spotlights work that's being done to address this disproportionate effect.
Well, thank you so much for that. I appreciate it. When I was Commissioner of Health at the height of the AIDS epidemic, the one thing that I learned was if we're going to mount large-scale public health programs, you have to go to the community. You have to listen to the community. You have to learn from the community about what works and what doesn't work in terms of your messaging and the ways in which you're trying to organize services. And so we're sort of applying that here, where we're starting to say, look, government has got its role, but we as community also have to marry that. We have our own work that we have to do, that is not just somebody else's problem. When the stakes are as high as those that you so eloquently outlined, when the death toll and the suffering is as great as you have described it, then it means that it's all hands on deck. And so what we've done is to create this thing called the Black Coalition Against COVID, which is community advocates from multiple segments of the community: faith community, labor community, returning incarcerated, homeless community, substance abuse community, just youth, putting it all together, the artists, and putting all of that together and sort of saying, what can we all do to be able to try to get people to comply with the advice that you laid out? And that's what this is all about.
Wonderful. Great. And I think there was a poetry slam today, wasn't it?
You know, if you want to try to talk to your children about health messages, why not have your children take the information and then let them tell each other? So we did a poetry slam, and it was incredible. And these kids went out and took the messages and then weaved it the way they needed to weave it and said, here. And at the end of the day, stay indoors.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I listened in. It was fantastic. And so I wanted to move from that to ask you a starting question to Emmanuel. So we talked about community, but there's another community out there, and that's the business community. And the business community employs so many people. And the business community has been hurting in this pandemic as well. And so, as we talk about reopening the economy, maybe you can share some thoughts about, the business community in DC, which I know you're very familiar with, and how fast or slow you think we're going, and what some of the pressures are on the business community right now.
Well, first, let me say, Dr. Clarke, it's always a pleasure to be with you and spend some time with you. It's amazing.
Absolutely.
I personally thank you for the work that you're doing. You're educating a lot of people. Because as you would imagine, that given the type of crisis that we're going through at this particular time, there's a lot of misinformation that's out there. And unfortunately, typically that misinformation hurts us. And I mean that in the collective sense, Black and brown people the most, because we don't have the access to the information. And I applaud you and all the work that you've been doing for many, many years. I mean, you're on TV now, and you're a superstar, and I congratulate you for that. But for those that are listening, they should know that Dr. Clarke has been just a stalwart of information and leading the efforts to focus on the health of our community. So I want to thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you, Emmanuel.
And I would be remiss if I didn't just tell you how honored I am to be on with the famous Dr. Reed Tuckson, who knows my mom and who is just someone that I've admired for a very long time. I mean, when I was growing up in the 70s, there weren't many Black doctors that were luminaries and you see on television. And I vividly remember images of seeing Dr. Tuckson there. And so, Dr. Tuckson, thank you for all the work that you've done. Selfless, because here's a guy who could have went to work in a professorship at Harvard and made tons of money. I'm sure he's done very well. But when you talk about his focus and his energy and where he wants to focus, it was on us. And so, Dr. Tuckson, I just want to thank you for that. And we need to applaud you for the work that you've done. So thank you.
Man, thank you.
Well said. Thank you so much, Emmanuel.
Yeah, I would say that from a business perspective, the first thing I think we always need to kind of keep in mind that although this is a very unprecedented, very different type of change from a business standpoint, and Dr. Clarke, you mentioned the small businesses, and I think oftentimes people forget that this economy is not run by IBM, it's not run by Boeing, it's not run by American Airlines. There are over 30 million small businesses that really are the engine and the fuel of this economy. And sadly, is my view, and many scholars and business entrepreneurs and researchers have commented on the fact that maybe half of those businesses will go away. Yeah. If you think about that, and in my view, in the context of why did the government do the PPP program, it really wasn't about IBM, General Dynamics, or any of those large-scale companies. It was about what I just referenced. It was about those small businesses, because small businesses employ the vast share. I mean, it is not even something that you can compare to large-scale businesses. And I've worked, as I know many of you have, at a lot of those businesses from IBM to Fannie Mae and et cetera, but they don't drive the economy. They get most of the government assistance, and that's what you see when we run into a crisis such as the one that we're going through right now. But to me, the issue is, how do we address those businesses? Because whatever the government subsidies that we give to the large-scale companies, that is not going to engender a full economic recovery that you and I and people that work for us and people that we know and family members that we associate with will feel in their pockets. Think about this. The GDP of the United States is expected to drop by 40%. That didn't happen during World War II. That didn't happen during World War I. It didn't happen in the crash, the stock market crash of 1920. This was uncharted territory that we've never been here before. And so the government, as you can see, from Fed policy, from fiscal policy, marrying that to public policy, which is a problem given the policymakers, I'll just frame it that way to be politically correct, in the White House, is going to be very, very problematic. And I, as a business owner, tend to think about what's the path forward, not where we are right now. And if you think about where we are right now, that could paralyze most people. And we seem to be focused on that particular issue. But I'm not focused on the past. And I think it was John Kennedy who said, those that focus on the past and the present will miss the future. And I will tell you, in my personal view, and I'm only one person with a private opinion, it's not the end all be all. But I think history would tell you, if you look back on history, all the greatest fortunes, all the greatest business accomplishments, everything that has happened from a business perspective that has really been transformational were born out of crisis. So those who can look at the crisis that they're in right now and figure out what's next and focus on what's next, not where they are going to be the folks who are going to survive. Because I can tell you right now, that was a dire statistic that I gave you, that 50% of the 30 million small businesses that will never return. Mm-hmm. That's going to create opportunities. And one of the things that I think, and I'm going to speak personally as an African American in my community, one of the things that we don't have is equity. We don't have equity in our home. We don't have net worth in our personal financials, and we don't have equity in businesses. So we're consumers. And what happens in a crisis? Consumers always lose. If you think about public policy right now and the way the government is thinking about it, I don't want to be controversial here, and I'm not casting any aspersions from a race or ethnicity standpoint, but I'm just talking facts. When, as you know, Dr. Clarke, when this disease and the scourge first came out, there was the reaction that everything in the world, not just in the United States, but every business, every person in the world needed shelter in place. Well, what happened? The CDC decided that they, as you mentioned earlier in your opening, they weren't collecting race or ethnicity, right, demographics. They weren't collecting socioeconomic.
That's correct. Yes.
Information. They changed that policy, and then what did they learn? They learned that although this is an unprecedented viral epidemic that affects everybody, irrespective of race and socioeconomic status, that the percentage of people who were dying once affected and those that went on intubation, 70% of them were Black and brown. Now, prior, when they learned that, and I think you recall, there was this myth that people of color weren't affected by this disease. And once that was debunked and the information came out that actually that 70% of people who are Black and brown are dying, our public policy changed from one of we need to shelter in place to now we need to open the economy.
Yeah, exactly.
The reason I relate that to your question is from a business standpoint, who are the engines of this economy? People in the lower socioeconomic strata, those who are Black and brown that are working on in non-exempt jobs. Think about this stat. It is estimated that 40% of those that have a household income of $40,000 or less will be unemployed.
Well, I think that is very concerning. And as you're making the point that consumers are the ones that drive the economy, and we oftentimes are the consumers, I guess I would go back to Dr. Tuckson to talk about what do you see from a public health standpoint going forward in terms of readiness to reopen, and you can pick any locality you want, Georgia, for example, which I know is where you are, or you could pick the DMV, or you could pick Illinois or California, anywhere you'd like, to just assess how states are doing in terms of readiness to reopen and balancing this economic issue that Emmanuel so eloquently summarized with the health concerns of the people who have to be the consumers in driving the reopening.
So the guidance is clear and objective. I mean, it's like it defines in a pretty reasonable way a set of criteria that must be met. Combining that with an infrastructure that allows you to successfully test, trace contacts, convince contacts to cooperate, and then if assessing reasonable risk, isolate again for 14 more days. Like, you have to make that happen. If you can make that happen, combined with the clear-cut criteria, then you start then it makes sense to start opening up slowly. The problem is that we don't have that hardly anywhere, and that's the issue. And when you don't have those things in place, when you reopen, it bounces around like a boomerang, right on back around and cuts all the way back across. And the opportunities then, the people that are going to be the ones most at risk are going to be us, because we'll be in those jobs. They're essential, but not disposable. Essential, but not disposable. Yeah. But they're so those are the ones. And so I think we now start to realize, look, come on, let's do it right so that everybody wins.
Yes, absolutely. And I think I'm going to take a quick check-in to see if there are questions. I thought I saw a couple flash up on the screen. Do we have any questions already? I think I saw a question about where do you think the business opportunities will emerge? And I'm pretty sure that one was for Emmanuel Bailey.
Well, thank you for that question. I think that is insightful, and I think that's where the need is and where people need to think about it. And the way I tend to look at that particular question is really from not a public policy standpoint, but just think about from a change standpoint. If you look at the history of this democratic society and you look at it from a entrepreneurial society, unfortunately, this level of change is not new. Mm-hmm. What is novel is the Corona-19, but I emphasize the number 19. There were 18 before that. Right. So this isn't new.
Well, actually, there was one before that. The 2019 is for the year, but I get your point, though.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, we knew about
other epidemics
since the 50s, right?
Yeah.
So my view is that at the end of the day, I think Albert Einstein said it best, and that is the measure of true intelligence is the ability to change. So from a business standpoint, you can look back historically through the record and identify changes in the economy, changes in consumer tastes and patterns, changes in technology. And those businesses who were dominant at that particular time on the old economy and didn't look forward because they were too focused on the present and the past, they died. I mean, I can give you a million examples from Blockbuster, right? I mean, we went from cars to planes. We went from Blockbuster to Netflix. We went from Netflix now to everyone streaming. And so where I see the opportunities is really no different than the way that I look at the past 10 to 20 years, which is, as this virus has proven in an undeniable way, the old business of person-to-person, brick-and-mortar based businesses, if you're an entrepreneur, is going away. I've heard some statistics from the Federal Reserve in New York that it may be 10 to 20 years before we get back to the GDP that we were before. Warren Buffett, who never loses money, lost over $150 million because in his view, the business of airlines is going to change in a way that will not be recovered. It makes me respect him even more because what he's doing is I'm not focused on the past dynamics. I'm going to focus on what's going to be the new dynamics. So where do I see the business opportunities? I think it's pretty clear. If you look at ways to connect with customers, to connect with employees, to drive business from even a government standpoint to a commercial standpoint, it's going to be what we're doing right now online. So, for example, probably not less than 6 months ago, I'd say that the average name recognition of Zoom and Microsoft Teams was probably less than 1%. What do you think it is now? So
80%.
80%. So much like you think about, and I've been investing in these companies, much like you think about when the iPhone first came on board and Android first came on board, there are like something like 22 billionaires. And the only thing they did is build applications for that platform. So if you think about where we are now, when you get on Zoom, you get on Microsoft Teams, there are really no applications. They have a few, but they're going to move to open source. So that's going to create a whole ecosystem and a whole revenue chain around the new economy. Now, we've known since 2000, since the dot-bomb era, that everything we do in commerce in the United States was the biggest commercial market in the world. I know you hear a lot about China, but we're 10 times the size of China. It's going to move to online. So, and I encourage particularly those who are Black and brown communities and lower economic status, from Native Americans to Hispanics, to think about the direct consumer to consumer way of making money is going to go the way of the dinosaur. So if you're not thinking about how are you going to generate revenue, and that's whether you want to be a worker or whether you want to be an employer, you need to be in that stream. And if you're not in that stream, you're going to get laid off or you're going to lose your business.
So I have a saying, the last time the dinosaurs met, they voted not to change. And I think that's one of the things that you're getting at there. I think we might have some other questions.
We have a question from Nicole Anthony Townsend. With states reopening, how can we help young brown people take their health risks more seriously and adhere to prevention measures?
Dr. Tuckson?
Great question. First of all, one of the things, at least, that we've been doing with this Black Coalition is to try to have young people talking to each other. And so the poetry slam that we did today, again, young people talking to each other in their own voices. We were lucky enough to sort of recruit the Big G Glover, one of the great go-go stars, to be able to have him on. We were putting him on the sides of buses in the city, again with a mask, saying, "I'm wearing mine. Why not you?" You know, so that we're trying to engage, you know, at that level. And then, of course, it is trying to begin to speak to our children in a way that says there is an accountability that you have. There is something called responsibility, and that I know that you know, a lot of times people don't treat you with respect, but I'm speaking with you, you know, with respect right now, you know, straight up. And I think people are starting to say you do have a shared accountability, especially when you're bringing it home into the house and hurting everyone else. And so I think we have a lot of work to do. But ultimately, I think it is to reach kids through the mechanisms that they respect, engaging the people that they trust, and dealing with authentic voices who can carry the message in an authentic way.
And I would like to tag on that too, that I think at the beginning of the pandemic, you know, the messaging, and sometimes still is, quite frankly, is mixed. And it's also coming from authority figures that young Black and brown people don't necessarily respect or trust. And so I think what Dr. Tuckson is saying, and to coin a phrase that the mayor of Chicago used, hyper local messaging, So that's exactly what he's saying, putting the message in the mouths of the people, or having them participate in crafting the messages, making the messages, sending the messages between each other, because there's trust there, as opposed to coming from outside a community, especially a community, from people that have been very unclear about the messaging all along. So,
Exactly.
yeah. Next question.
We have a question coming from Dr. Jeffrey Mount Varner. I humbly ask the question. Bottom line is, we are going to open up and many of us are going to have to go to work. What are additional steps that we can take to protect ourselves?
And before you answer that, I just want to acknowledge that's Dr. Mount Varner, emergency medicine physician. So I will throw that out to Dr. Tuckson.
You know, first of all, thank you for the work that you do. First of all, we have to continue to make sure you have the equipment needed to protect yourself. That's absolutely essential. And if you do not, then we need to know. Everyone needs to know. We must know. And assuming that that's not the issue, then of course it's going to be how do we try to turn the spigot off of all the patients that would be coming into your door? And that's really where the work is. The work is really going to be in the community. It's going to be in the places where life is lived. It's going to be in the environment where people decide to go to the barbecue or not. It's going to be whether people decide, I'm gonna walk around without the mask and we're going to play basketball. I mean, it's at that level. And I think and I hope that we will actually be able to find ways of linking together all of our efforts in some commonality, some leverage, some capacity building that changes the conversation, changes the culture, changes the ethic, and does it to a go-go rhythm.
We have a question coming in from the West Coast. This is for Emmanuel Bailey. Are
Emmanuel,
there
how oh, can you hear me? I was going to say, just to Emmanuel, in terms of the restrictions that small businesses are under to make environments safe, how difficult is it to have a hairstylist or a restaurant carry out that hygiene and the social distancing and come up with new ways of essentially recreating their business?
Well, I mean, I would say this. I think if you look through the historical record, there's been small businesses that innovate more than large businesses. They have the freedom to do that. They don't have the organizational bureaucracy that prevents innovation. And the most important thing, mother is the necessity of all invention, right?
That's true.
When you're a small business and you don't have the access to the capital markets, and you've got a landlord that's asking for that rent, typically small businesses will find a way. I'm not really worried about small businesses finding a way to adapt and change because, again, it's the 80-20 principle. 80% of those businesses, unfortunately, are not going to return and they're going to fail. But the 20% are going to find a way to adapt and to change and to serve the customers in a regulatory way that's consistent with the public policy. And you'll see that some of those businesses will wind up acquiring other small businesses that left opportunities on the table. I'm a fan of looking at the fact that most businesses grow not in times of prosperity. They grow in times of adversity because they've done something different. And I think you're going to see that here. Because if you think about small businesses, usually the biggest expense they have is the physical footprint, the lease for the retail space that they're engaged in. This is unprecedented from the standpoint that the large commercial retailers and owners of physical buildings are in more trouble than the small businesses.
Okay. Yeah.
Think about this from the standpoint. If you're a large business and you rent, think about Amazon, 10, 20 million square feet of office space, Class A, high CBD rate per square foot. I believe that business is going to go away because now, for the first time, IBM, Boeing, General Dynamics have realized, and these were businesses that were really adverse to stay-at-home work from home, because most managers are terrible at managing, right? I need to see you in order to manage you.
Right.
And now they had no choice. They were forced into driving results, meeting the bottom line in a situation where they couldn't see the staff that reported to them. And guess what they learned? It works.
Yeah.
Many people are
Absolutely.
far more productive because they're not losing an hour driving to work. They're not dealing with daycare. And so what businesses are going to, I think, come to the realization, why should I spend 10 to 15% of my EBITDA on real estate costs when I could have hoteling space, like personally, and I'm not in advertising any investment in a particular company, but companies like WeWork that were struggling, they're going to do well because large companies are going to realize, really what I just need is a conference room. I think that if you think about from a public policy standpoint, and I defer to Dr. Tuckson, it's going to be 12 to 24 months before we see CDC recommendations that groups of 10 to 15 can congregate in the interior space. The business, as you see, is coming back right now. We need to collaborate and we need to meet. How are we going to do that? So, in my view, at the end of the day, it's going to be a new dynamic and a new way to work, a new way that large-scale companies have gotten comfortable with. We don't need the large footprint where I need 10 offices and 20 executives and 100 people or 1,000 people all in one particular space. We can do that in a platform that lowers our real estate costs, our fixed costs, lowers our EBITDA, and we can move forward. So that would be my view.
Right. So almost like a Airbnb for office space, like in a like rework.
So
All right. I think we have another question.
we're about to start a lightning round because we have a few questions that we need to get to. So one question from Los Angeles. Los Angeles County has developed a task force, and one of their initiatives is housing of hundreds of homeless people in hotels. Are there anything like this in DC Metro or the Atlanta area?
Dr. Tuckson, if you want to speak to Atlanta, and I can speak to DC.
I actually don't know Atlanta, so I'll let you go ahead. Even though I live here, my whole focus is DC. Go ahead, Doc.
Okay. Well, there have been 4 hotels in the DC area that have been used to house individuals that are homeless. Unity Healthcare, and the reason I know this is because Unity Healthcare, which is one of the federally qualified health centers in DC, what other people probably colloquially know as a free clinic. They're subsidized by the federal government to provide healthcare. So I used to be chairman of the board at Unity, so I'm still very close to what they do. They have been contracted to provide the COVID-related health care to those individuals. So all the testing, and they're using telemedicine to be able to correspond with those individuals who are in those hotels to ensure that they get testing, they have medical supplies, etc. And we just wrote an article about it that is about to be published next week. So there is work that's being done in DC along those lines.
Another question for Emmanuel. Are there any monies from the lottery going for COVID relief in your city?
Well, what I would say to that is that since about 2010, since we've managed lottery contract, over $600 million has been returning profits back to the DC General Fund. There are many lotteries where the profits are specialized and targeted for specific causes like education and things of that nature. In DC, however, and even the Harvard Review has said this is the best public policy, the revenues from the District of Columbia lottery go back to the general fund. So that encompasses everything that Dr. Clarke just talked about: homelessness, violence prevention, women with children, homelessness, childhood education, early education, education, nutrition. So anything you can look at the district government budget, and there's been about $1 billion that's been returned since about 2008. And if you think about DC, a lot of people don't realize that the District of Columbia budget is larger than 11 US states. So it is a very large budget. And so the proceeds from the lottery are returned back to the DC General Fund. And in fact, the new contract, which I'm a part of, the sports betting contract, there's an actual set aside on what we call GGR, gross gaming revenue, which is set aside on the top end, not on the net profit EBITDA end. And that goes to violence prevention and early childhood education.
Great, thank you.
In the United States.
Okay, we have a message from a question from LaShawn Phillips Martin. What can we do from a mental health standpoint to help our young people?
That's a great
Dr.
question.
Tuckson?
Yeah. I think, first of all, the one thing that our children must always have is a sense of hope. They must have a sense that there's a belief in the concept of the possibility of a meaningful future, and that they are legitimately perhaps afraid and frightened. And so we have to deal with that, in a very sensitive and caring kind of way. We have to be able to talk about how to protect yourself in a scary world without taking away their childhood. That's a delicate dance, isn't it? But I think that once we recognize that that's our objective, and we're sensitive to that, we become better listeners. I think we engage our children a little bit better. And then there's going to be the need to, how do we structure the time that they are spending? What did they do with this time? Time is precious. And so I think if we want to be clear that we're saying to them, what are you developing if you have the capacity, if you live in a home that gives it enough peace and enough quiet that you can actually, read, and you can actually think a little, and you can actually draw, hopefully every child can at least have that. So I think those are the things that come to mind. But ultimately, make sure that you give them the opportunity to be nervous and afraid, and that it's okay. It's all right to be that way. We all are, but we get through this.
Great, thank you so much. I think there's another question.
Linda Hampton writes, "I love to know if someone is a carrier of the virus, does it ever go away?"
Melissa, do you want?
No, go ahead.
Well,
please.
If you are a carrier of the virus, it does eventually go away. So you are not. There is a period of time when you are not infectious anymore, and so that's very important.
Yes, and also I think there's also been some reporting in the media around people who are testing positive after having tested negative, and did they get the virus again? The explanations, I think, have to do more with the fact that the testing, if the amount of virus in your system gets so low at some point, the test becomes inconclusive sometimes. And so if they're tested after the virus count has started to go down, it may come back as negative, even though the virus isn't totally cleared, so that another future test could still pick it up. But the point is that the virus will ultimately get eliminated from someone's system, as far as we can tell, in the majority of people. Yes, next question.
Max Gregory Anderson writes, "How does Dr. Tuckson see the future of higher education?"
The fundamental business model for higher education is going to evolve, just as Emmanuel was sort of describing. the old model is going to, if you can't just think the same way you used to think. It's different now. And so that the business model of that is also has to be translated into an academic model, a vision of the world. So what is the vision of the world now? How do we rethink where we were going in education? This pell-mell push towards Silicon Valley, this all-out assault on science, technology, engineering, and math. Probably still a good idea, but are there some other things we need to start thinking about now? Does the fragility of life start to become more involved? So my point being is that I think that there is a real reason for a certain dynamism, entrepreneurship, intellectual entrepreneurship that can occur in higher education now in response to a changing world. And I think the historically Black colleges and universities have a special opportunity to do that. And then I think that the opportunity that we have to do that justifies resources being put into them to give them the chance to actually do it.
Absolutely.
Last two questions come in.
Thank you so much. Do we have any other questions?
Yes, we have a question coming in. How do we get our community the right information in business and not just conspiracy theories in medicine also?
All right, I think that's one for both of you. Emmanuel, you want to go first?
Yeah, thank you for that question. That's a very interesting question. And you know how when you go on your phone and you can set your app to push versus pull, where information is pushed to you versus you have to do something affirmatively to request that information. And I think that's a particular problem, a very specific problem in our communities, that oftentimes we rely too much on information coming to us rather than seeking it. And I would tell you that 90% of it, maybe more, the information that comes to you unsolicited or that you happen to see isn't accurate and doesn't tell the full story. The only way you can really seek information is that you actually have to take an affirmative action to go get it. And the days of sitting on the sideline waiting for people to tell you what the situation is, I think that is gone. So, in my view, if you don't take your own personal commitment to seek the information, if you think about the world we live in now, it used to be you could read 100 newspapers and get 200 different stories and takes on the same issue. Now you got all this social media to all the cable channels and things of that nature. It is really a matter of life and death, literally. And I don't say that from a facetious standpoint. I really mean that from a standpoint for you and your family, that if you're not invested into your ability to make your own decision based on all of the differing and competing sets of data, then you're going to be left behind and you're going to make the wrong decision. That's from a business standpoint, and that's from a personal standpoint. How many of you have gone to YouTube and seen all kinds of, conspiracy theories, and you really don't know, what's true or what's fact? Let me give you a very relevant example here. How many of you remember when the Corona-19 virus first came out? It was almost universally accepted that Black people weren't affected by it. I think a lot of people, right? Until we started to get the data, and guess what? Not only are we not immune to it, 70% of us are dying from it when we only represent 20% of the entire United States population. So this is a case where access to information and the way that you access and consume that information could not only affect your life, but your business career. So this is not a time to sit back and wait to consume information. This is a time to to show the initiative and the dedication and the commitment to go out and seek information. And usually those that are consumers, they lose, right? If you consume, you lose. If you create, you win.
Thank you, Emmanuel. And I think probably maybe ask you to give us a couple of links to good places to seek out accurate business information.
Sure.
And I'll ask you for that. And then Dr. Tuckson?
I think that was beautiful what he said. I mean, I really like that. So let me just add it and augment it, that in addition to that, we need to make the dissemination channels are the normal dissemination channels of normal life. In other words, there is a church dissemination channel that there's a pipeline, it's not dried up and it reaches a whole lot of people. Now, can you structure all of those networks pumping the same information at the same time? And then there's a labor network. It's tight, very tight. Can you imagine pumping life-saving stuff through it at the same time you pump it through the church? And so I'm not going to go, but you just kind of go on around the circle, and you start going, wait a minute. What if all of these were pumping on rhythm?
Wow.
At the same time, over and over and over again? What if you could do that? Could that maybe make a difference? Maybe a little bit, Is it worth the effort? Damn right.
Absolutely. And I think Dr. Tuckson is describing the vision of Black Coalition Against COVID-19 and getting accurate health information to all these different subpopulations through the people that speak their language, but the information is the same, just delivered differently, so the audience can be receptive and hear it from people that they trust. So absolutely. So I think we probably are winding down in terms of maybe the last question or so. Is that right?
No, you guys answered the last question. I think that's a wrap.
All right.
All right.
Well, listen, this was fantastic. I feel that I have been in the presence of giants with this discussion.
I think
Thank you.
feels that way. So
Thank you so much for giving
Emmanuel,
up your
that
time.
was fun, man.
but
Yeah, it was funny, man. I enjoyed that, man.
it was an honor to be with you and Dr. Clarke.
All right, man. All right.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Listen,
So
you're great.
thank you to both of you for giving of your time, your wisdom, your expertise, your knowledge, and sharing with us this evening. Thank you to the audience for tuning in. You all had fantastic questions. Remember, we're going to be back here next Monday night, 9 o'clock. Tomorrow, you can catch me on the Russ Parr Morning Show at 7:45 for you early risers. And also, I will be on WHUR every Monday as well, around 6-ish in the evening. I'll give you more details. And you can also catch my YouTube channel, where a lot of these videos and new videos will also be archived, giving you accurate health information. So until then, remember, be wise, be well, and be health empowered. Thanks for joining us. And thank you all. Have a good